My name is Liam Carter. I'm 34 years old, a project manager at Donovan Construction, and until 2 months ago, I believed in building things that last: houses, careers, marriages. I believed in the kind of honesty that lets you sleep peacefully at night, knowing you've never betrayed the people who trust. I thought I'd married someone who believed in the same things. Nina and I met 5 years ago at a networking event downtown, one of those forced professional mixers where everyone pretends to care about synergy while nursing watered-down drinks. She was standing by the appetizer table, rolling her eyes at some guy's pitch about revolutionary software solutions. When he finally moved on, she turned to me and said, "If I hear the word paradigm one more time, I'm going to start throwing these little quiches at people." I laughed. Really laughed for the first time all evening. We spent the rest of the night talking about hiking trails and terrible action movies that made us both cry laughing. She had this way of finding humor in everything, this lightness that made even mundane conversations feel electric. When she told me she'd rather spend weekends on mountain paths than in shopping malls, I knew I'd found someone special. Our first date was a hike up Devil's Backbone Trail. She kept up with me easily, chatting about everything from her marketing job to her terrible cooking skills to her dream of having a garden someday. At the summit, sharing a thermos of coffee and looking out over the valley, she said, "This is perfect." And I felt it too. That rare moment when everything aligns, when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I did it on the same trail where we'd had our first date, with the same thermos of coffee and a ring I'd been carrying in my backpack for 3 months, waiting for the perfect moment. She cried when she said yes. Happy tears, the kind that make you feel like you've won something precious. Our wedding was everything we'd dreamed of. A garden ceremony at her aunt's house, 40 people who actually mattered to us, vows we wrote ourselves that made half the guests tear up. Nina wore a simple white dress and wildflowers in her hair. During our first dance, she whispered in my ear, "This is our beginning, Liam. Our real beginning." I believed her completely. The first 3 years were exactly what happiness is supposed to feel like. We bought the 3-bedroom house I'd been saving for since college, a 1960s ranch with good bones and a backyard perfect for the garden Nina wanted. We painted every room together, argued playfully about furniture placement, hosted dinner parties where Nina's laughter was always the loudest sound in the room. During our second year of marriage, Nina decided to stop working. "I want to focus on making our house a home," she said, curled up against me on the couch we'd finally agreed on. "I want to plan our future, maybe start thinking about kids soon. You make enough for both of us, and I'm tired of spending 40 hours a week on campaigns for products I don't care about." I didn't hesitate. I trusted her completely, trusted us completely. We had solid savings, my salary covered our expenses comfortably, and the idea of Nina turning our house into the kind of home where we'd raise children someday felt like the natural next step in our story. For 3 years after she stopped working, life was everything I'd hoped for when I was younger and lonelier and wondering if I'd ever find someone who fit with me so perfectly. Comfortable dinners where we actually talked instead of staring at phones. Weekend hikes that sometimes turned into all-day adventures. Inside jokes that made us laugh until our stomachs hurt. The easy rhythm of 2 people who knew each other's coffee preferences and favorite sleeping positions and how to make each other smile after bad days. But then, 2 months ago, something shifted. It started with small things. Nina's phone, which had always been left carelessly on kitchen counters or bedside tables, unlocked and unguarded, suddenly required a password. When I asked about it casually, she shrugged and replied, "Too many spam calls. Just being more careful." It seemed reasonable, logical even. Then came the phone calls she started taking outside. Always the same explanation when I inquired, "It's just my mom." You know how she is. Talks forever about absolutely nothing. Patricia Brennan did talk a lot, so again, it seemed reasonable. But Nina had never minded me overhearing her mother's rambling before. Why now? The intimacy disappeared next. When I reached for her at night, she pulled away with excuses that piled up like kindling waiting for a match. Too tired. Headache. Not tonight, maybe tomorrow. Stress from planning her cousin's baby shower. A whole month passed without any physical connection between us. When I tried to talk about it, to understand what was wrong, she dismissed me with increasing irritation. "I'm just stressed, Liam," she snapped when I brought it up. "Not everything is about you. Can't you give me space to work through things without making it a big dramatic conversation?" "What things?" I asked. "What stress? Our life is comfortable, stable, exactly what we built together. What changed?" "Nothing changed," she replied curtly. "I just need some space right now." But something had changed. My gut whispered what my heart refused to believe. That whisper grew louder every day, drowning out my attempts at rationalization. Nina was pulling away from me in every way that mattered, becoming secretive about things that had never been secrets, treating me like an obstacle instead of her partner. I didn't want to be right. I couldn't live not knowing. So the day she announced a full-day shopping trip with friends, something she hadn't done in months, I made a decision that would expose everything and destroy the life I thought we had. The moment Nina's silver Honda disappeared around the corner of Maple Street, I moved. I'd been planning this for 3 sleepless nights, researching, ordering, rehearsing in my mind the installation process that would either prove my paranoia or confirm my worst fears. The package had arrived 2 days earlier. 4 wireless security cameras, each no bigger than a ping-pong ball, designed to be virtually invisible when properly positioned. Motion-activated, night vision capable, syncing directly to my phone and laptop with cloud storage backup. The kind of equipment that would have been science fiction 20 years ago, now available for $300 on Amazon. My hand shook as I opened the box. This felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, admitting that my marriage was already broken even if I couldn't prove it yet. But the alternative, living with the constant gnawing uncertainty, watching Nina grow more distant every day while pretending everything was normal, felt like dying slowly from the inside out. I started in the living room, positioning the first camera on top of our bookshelf behind a picture frame, angled to capture the couch where Nina spent most of her phone time. The second went in our bedroom, hidden among the decorative items on my dresser, with a clear view of the bed and Nina's side of the room. The third I placed in the kitchen, tucked behind a coffee canister on the counter. The fourth went in the hallway, disguised among the family photos hanging on the wall. Each camera synced to my phone within minutes. The image quality was crystal clear. The motion sensors were sensitive enough to activate when someone entered a room, but stable enough not to trigger from passing shadows. Perfect surveillance equipment for a home I'd never imagined needing to monitor. The testing process made me feel sick. Watching myself on the live feed, seeing our bedroom from this new perspective, like a crime scene waiting to happen. This was our sanctuary, the place where we'd made love and shared dreams and held each other through winter nights. Now it was under digital observation. Every moment recorded for evidence I prayed I'd never need. When Nina returned that evening, bags from 3 different stores and her mood strangely cheerful for the first time in weeks, I felt like a fraud. She kissed my cheek at the door, a quick, perfunctory peck that used to be warm and lingering, and chattered about sales and lunch with the girls while I nodded and smiled and died a little more inside. "How was your day?" she asked, settling onto the couch with her phone already in her hand. "Quiet," I replied. "Caught up on some work stuff. How was shopping?" "Good, really good." "I needed that," she answered, already scrolling through something, her attention split. "I'm thinking of making this a regular thing. Getting out of the house more, reconnecting with friends." I wanted to ask which friends. When this had started, why she'd never mentioned feeling disconnected before. Instead, I said, "That sounds great, babe. I'm glad you had fun." The first week of footage was psychological torture, not because it showed betrayal, but because it didn't. Hours of Nina watching Netflix, cooking meals, folding laundry, talking on the phone with the speaker positioned away from any camera. Normal, domestic, innocent activities that made me question my sanity. Maybe I really was becoming paranoid. Maybe the distance between us was just a rough patch, the kind every marriage goes through. Maybe I'd become the villain of my own story, spying on my wife like some controlling monster who couldn't trust the woman he'd vowed to love and honor. But then came the phone calls. Always taken in the living room now, always with Nina positioned so the camera couldn't see her face or pick up clear audio. 15-minute conversations that left her smiling or frowning or staring at the ceiling like someone processing complex emotions. When I asked casually who she'd been talking to, the answer was always the same. Just my mom. Patricia Brennan calling every single day, sometimes twice a day for weeks. It seemed excessive even for a woman who loved to chat. Then Nina announced that her parents were visiting for the weekend. George and Patricia Brennan driving down from Sacramento for their first stay with us in over a year. I genuinely liked George. He was the kind of man who meant what he said and said what he meant. A retired electrician with calloused hands and laugh lines earned through 62 years of honest living. He'd built Patricia's dream kitchen with his own hands, coached Little League for 15 years, never missed a birthday or anniversary. The kind of father-in-law who made you grateful instead of nervous. Patricia was all charm and energy. The type of woman who lit up rooms and remembered everyone's favorite dessert and hugged like she actually meant it. She'd welcomed me into their family immediately, treating me like the son they'd never had. During our engagement, she'd spent hours helping Nina plan our wedding, both of them giggling over flowers and centerpieces like conspirators in happiness. They arrived Friday evening with overnight bags and Patricia's famous chocolate chip cookies. George immediately complimented the work I'd done refinishing our hardwood floors. Patricia admired Nina's new curtains and asked about my promotion at work like she genuinely cared about the answer. Saturday morning, George suggested fishing. "Let the women have their girl time," he said with a knowing grin that suggested years of experience with Patricia's need for uninterrupted conversation. I brought my gear. Know any good spots around here? I do, I replied. Lake Reed, 20 minutes away. Decent bass fishing. We spent 6 hours there talking about work and weather and the baseball season, the easy conversation between men who respect each other. George told me about his retirement plans, his concerns about Patricia getting bored without his work schedule to structure her days. I found myself talking about my hopes for promotion, my thoughts about starting a family, the way Nina and I were navigating the transition from newlyweds to a settled married couple. "You're good for her," George said as we packed up our gear. "Nina's always been spirited, needed someone steady to balance her out." Patricia and I worried she'd never find someone who could keep up with her energy, but also ground her when she needed it. His words should have made me happy. Instead, they felt like a knife twisting in a wound I couldn't acknowledge. When we returned that evening, Nina and Patricia were in the kitchen, wine glasses half empty, faces flushed with whatever secrets women share when men aren't around. They were laughing about something, heads close together like conspirators. The scene looked warm, familial, exactly what I'd hoped for when I married into this family. Sunday afternoon, George and Patricia left with hugs and promises to do it again soon. Nina seemed genuinely sad to see them go, waving from the driveway until their car disappeared. That evening, she settled onto the couch with her phone, the same position she'd occupied every night for months. I retreated to my home office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. The weekend footage was mostly boring. Family meals, conversations about local restaurants, Patricia admiring Nina's decorating choices. Nothing suspicious, nothing remotely concerning, until I clicked on Saturday afternoon footage. Nina and Patricia, alone in the living room, wine flowing freely, tongues loosened by alcohol and assumed privacy. I turned up the volume and watched my world end in real time. What I heard in that recording didn't just confirm my worst fear. It revealed something far darker. A conspiracy between mother and daughter, a legacy of lies, and a man who deserved the truth as much as I did. I didn't sleep that night. The recording played in my mind on an endless loop. Nina giggling about Kyle, Patricia casually admitting 15 years of adultery, both women laughing about the clueless men they'd deceived. The betrayal wasn't just Nina's affair. It was the calculated coaching, the mother teaching the daughter how to lie more effectively, how to steal years from good men without remorse. So how long has this been going on? Patricia's voice echoed in my memory, conspiratorial, like she was asking about a new hobby rather than adultery. Nina had giggled, actually giggled, like a teenager sharing gossip. 3 months now. Maybe 4? Time kind of blurs together. And Liam doesn't suspect anything? Patricia had asked. God, no, Nina had replied with a laugh. He's so trusting it's almost pathetic. I could probably tell him I was having an affair, and he'd find a way to rationalize it. Patricia had laughed, that warm, familiar sound I'd heard at countless family dinners. Men like that make it almost too easy. Your father's the same way, sees what he wants to see, believes what he wants to believe. What do you mean? Nina had asked. Then came the confession that shattered everything. Oh, honey, Patricia had said, refilling their wine glasses. I've been having my own fun for 15 years. George thinks I spend my Thursdays at book club and my Saturday mornings at yoga. Really, I'm with David. You remember David from the country club? The tennis instructor? Nina's eyes had widened with delighted shock. Mom, 15 years! 15 wonderful years, Patricia had confirmed. The key is consistency, sweetie. Same story, same schedule, same level of detail every time. Never get creative with your lies. Creativity is where you get caught. By morning, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. George Brennan was a good man who'd spent 15 years being systematically betrayed by a woman he trusted completely. He deserved the truth. Deserved the chance to reclaim what was left of his life. I called in sick to work. The first time I'd used a personal day for anything other than actual illness. Nina was still sleeping when I left the house at 8 a.m., telling her I had an early meeting. She murmured something incoherent and rolled over, probably dreaming about Kyle and their next rendezvous. The drive to George's house took 30 minutes. When George opened the door, confused by the unexpected visit, my face told him everything he needed to know about the conversation we were about to have. Liam, what brings you by so early? He asked with initial surprise. Everything okay? My expression must have answered his question before I could speak. His smile faded, replaced by the careful attention of a man who'd lived long enough to recognize the approach of serious trouble. I need to show you something, George, I said quietly. It's going to be hard to hear. Really hard. He stepped aside wordlessly, leading me into his living room. We sat across from each other, separated by a coffee table that Patricia had probably picked out while secretly planning her next hotel meeting with David. I opened my laptop, found the recording, positioned the screen so George could see and hear everything clearly. I need you to watch this, I explained. Patricia and Nina were talking while we were fishing yesterday. They thought they were alone. George's face went through a dozen transformations as the audio played. Confusion gave way to disbelief, disbelief to pale recognition, recognition to burning red rage that made his hands shake. When Nina started describing Kyle, George's jaw clenched so tightly I could hear his teeth grinding. When Patricia admitted to 15 years with David, George made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. When the recording ended, silence filled the room like smoke from a structure fire. George sat perfectly still, staring at the black screen, processing not just the betrayal but the scope of it. 15 years, half his retirement, an entire adult lifetime of lies. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. How long have you had this? I found it yesterday, I answered. I came straight to you. George nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Recognition that this young man, his son-in-law, had chosen integrity over self-interest, had driven over here immediately rather than keeping this ammunition for his own divorce proceedings. What are you going to do? He asked. I've already contacted a lawyer, I replied. Divorce papers are being drafted, George exhaled, a sound like air escaping from something punctured and dying. So am I. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. I'd made copies of everything before leaving the house. This is for your attorney. The original recordings plus the installation footage from my security cameras to prove authenticity. George took the drive with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. The shock was giving way to something harder, colder. Thank you, he said, looking at me with something between grief and gratitude. I'm sorry, son, for what my daughter did to you, and for what my wife did to both of us. It's not your fault, I replied, isn't it? George asked, his voice carrying 3 decades of second-guessing. I should have seen something, should have questioned why Patricia was suddenly so busy, so involved in activities that didn't include me. They're experts at this, George, I said. Patricia's been perfecting her deception for 15 years. Nina learned from a master. We sat together in that knowledge for a while, two men united by the women who'd systematically destroyed their trust. George made coffee and we got down to business. I'd already researched the best divorce attorneys in the area, had consultations scheduled for Monday morning. "Jim, it's George Brennan," he said when he called his lawyer. "I need to see you Monday morning, early as possible. It's about Patricia." "Yes, divorce, adultery. I have evidence." The conversation was brief, professional, final. When George hung up, he looked at me with something approaching relief. 30 years, he said. 30 years of marriage, and at least half of it was a lie. How do you process something like that? You don't, I answered. You just move forward. We spent the next hour planning our exits with the precision of engineers dismantling something toxic. The recorded evidence was devastating. Clear admissions of adultery, detailed discussions of deception, Patricia's coaching session on maintaining multiple lies simultaneously. Neither of us discussed revenge in emotional terms. We didn't talk about making them suffer or destroying their lives out of spite. We discussed justice, the legal, social, and financial consequences that naturally flow from sustained betrayal. "One more thing," George said as I prepared to leave. "Patricia's going to panic when I confront her. She'll call Nina immediately. You should be prepared for that conversation to happen before you're ready for it." He was right. The moment Patricia realized her 15-year secret was exposed, she'd warn Nina. The careful confrontation I'd been planning would evaporate the second Patricia made her panic call. "Let me know when you're going to talk to her," I said. "I'll try to time Nina's confrontation accordingly." George nodded, then surprised me by standing and extending his hand. When I shook it, his grip was firm, decisive. "Thank you, Liam, for having the integrity to show me this instead of keeping it for yourself. For treating me like a man who deserved the truth." "We're family," I said, and meant it. "We're family. We deserve better than this." Driving home, I felt strangely calm. The waiting was over. The investigation was complete. The evidence was overwhelming. Tomorrow, legal proceedings would begin. I thought I'd have time to plan the confrontation, to control the moment of revelation. But when I walked through my front door that evening, I realized Patricia's panic call had already changed everything. The war had already begun. I walked into my own home to find Nina sobbing on the couch, mascara streaking her face in black rivers, phone clutched in her shaking hand like a lifeline to a sinking ship. The moment she saw me, grief transformed into raw volcanic rage. "How could you?" she screamed, launching herself off the couch like she wanted to physically attack me. "You destroyed my parents' marriage. Do you understand what you've done?" I stood in the doorway, car keys still in my hand, watching my wife of 5 years transform into someone I'd never seen before. This wasn't the Nina who laughed at terrible movies or made inside jokes about our hiking adventures. This was a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. "I showed your father the truth," I replied, my voice calm in a way that surprised me. "That's all. The truth?" She shot back. "You recorded private conversations. You violated our privacy. You're sick!" The irony was suffocating. Nina was accusing me of violation while she'd been systematically betraying our marriage for months. But I didn't point that out yet. I wanted to see how deep her delusion ran. "He kicked my mom out," she continued, her voice breaking with hysteria. "She has nowhere to go. 30 years of marriage and you destroyed it with your sick obsession." "I didn't destroy anything, Nina," I answered steadily. "Your mother destroyed her marriage 15 years ago when she started f***ing David at the country club." Nina's face went white. The crude language hit her like a physical blow, shattering whatever fantasy she'd constructed about this being my fault rather than theirs. "This is your fault," she whispered, but the conviction was already draining from her voice. "If you hadn't been spying on us, if you hadn't been cheating on me," I interrupted. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Nina's expression shifted rapidly. Calculation, panic. The desperate scramble of someone trying to find solid ground in a collapsing world. "I don't know what you think you heard," she began. I pulled out my phone. The audio of their conversation filled our living room. Nina's laughter, Patricia's casual confession, their discussion of Kyle and David, and the clueless husbands they'd been deceiving. Every damning word echoed off the walls of the home we'd built together. Nina's face went through the same transformation I'd watched George experience. Disbelief. Recognition. Dawning horror at the scope of exposure. She looked like someone watching their own execution. "I have video too," I continued, my voice steady as granite. "Full footage of you and your mother planning how to maintain your affairs. Discussing the best ways to lie to your husbands. Laughing about how pathetic and trusting we are." The calculation in Nina's eyes shifted into overdrive. I could see her mental gears spinning, searching for angles, leverage, ways to minimize the damage or shift the blame. "Liam, please," she said, her voice becoming soft, pleading, the tone she'd used when she wanted something from me during happier times. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I'll end it with Kyle. We can go to counseling. We can start over." "Pack your bags," I said firmly. "You're leaving. Tonight." The pleading mask fell away, replaced by cold fury. "Where am I supposed to go?" she demanded. "My dad won't let me in the house. My mom's been kicked out." I walked to the front door and opened it. Evening air rushed in, cool and final. "Not my problem," I stated. "This is my house too," she protested. "I've lived here for 5 years. "Check the deed," I replied calmly. "My name only. I bought this house before we got married." Nina stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. The trusting, accommodating husband she'd been deceiving for months was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder. "Liam, please," she tried again, tears flowing freely now. "I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can work through this." "You don't know what love means," I answered simply. The simplicity of the statement seemed to hit her harder than any accusation. She stood there, tears streaming, finally understanding that this wasn't a negotiation. She grabbed a suitcase and began throwing clothes into it haphazardly, her hands shaking with fury and fear. At the door, she turned back one last time. "I hate you," she whispered. "Good," I replied. "That makes this easier." She left, dragging her suitcase to her car, sobbing loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I closed the door, locked it, and stood in the sudden silence of my house. Gone. All of it, but clean. Finally clean. Over the next 60 days, the legal machinery ground forward. My attorney, Michael Rodriguez, was exactly what I'd hoped for. Experienced, ruthless, and immediately impressed by the quality of evidence I'd provided. "This is a prosecutor's dream," he told me during our first meeting. Clear audio and video evidence of adultery, recorded confessions, strategic planning of deception. The recorded conversations weren't absolute proof of physical adultery, but they were devastating character evidence. Rodriguez used the evidence expertly. The settlement was brutal. I kept the house, our entire savings account, and my full retirement portfolio. Nina received a minimal cash settlement, enough to survive, not enough to thrive. George's divorce moved even faster. Patricia's recorded confession to 15 years of adultery was legal dynamite. She lost everything: the house, the savings, the retirement accounts. She received minimal alimony, barely enough to survive. Nina and Patricia initially moved in together into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Within weeks, the blame game began. "This is your fault," Nina reportedly screamed during one explosive argument. "You gave me terrible advice." "My fault?" Patricia screamed back. "You're the one who got caught." The alliance that had conspired in laughter and wine crumbled into bitterness and recrimination. Kyle vanished the moment Nina's marriage exploded, apparently only interested in the thrill of the forbidden. David proved equally unreliable when Patricia needed actual commitment. Both women ended up alone, struggling, abandoned by the men they'd sacrificed their marriages to pursue. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about walking away from the wreckage and letting the guilty bury themselves. 6 months later, I learned just how thoroughly they'd managed to do exactly that. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sit across from George at our usual diner. Two men who never expected to become friends, bonded by the worst experience of our lives. We meet every few weeks now, sometimes for lunch, sometimes for fishing, sometimes just to sit in comfortable silence that requires no explanation. "How you holding up?" George asks over burgers and fries. "Better every day," I answer honestly. You? Same, he replies. Life's quieter now. But better. We've both rebuilt. I threw myself into work, earned a promotion, started hiking again, alone this time, but free. I've been on a few dates, nothing serious, but the idea of trusting someone again doesn't feel impossible anymore. Just distant. George sold the house he'd shared with Patricia, downsized to a condo, reconnected with old friends he'd neglected during his marriage. He looks younger now, I think. Lighter. Through mutual acquaintances and the inevitable small-town gossip network, we've learned what became of Nina and Patricia. The mother-daughter alliance lasted exactly 3 months before imploding into mutual hatred. They now live separately. Nina works as a cashier at a retail store. Patricia cleans hotel rooms. Both are alone. Both struggle. Nina tried calling me twice in the first month, blocked numbers with tearful voicemails about mistakes and second chances. I never responded. Eventually, she stopped trying. Kyle, the affair partner, vanished the moment Nina's marriage exploded. When Nina tried to contact him after the divorce, hoping to transition their affair into something more substantial, he made it clear that he had no interest in a publicly divorced woman with financial problems. I don't feel triumphant about their downfall. I don't gloat or celebrate their suffering. I simply feel free. The anger that consumed me in those first weeks has cooled into something calmer. Acceptance. Not of what they did, but of what I did in response. I chose truth over complicity, justice over convenient silence, self-respect over false reconciliation. George raises his beer. To new beginnings, I raise my own. To honest foundations. We drink. Two men who lost everything they thought they wanted and discovered they could survive, and eventually thrive, without it. Outside the diner window, life continues. The world didn't stop for our betrayals or our revenge, but we're still here, still standing, still building something better on the ruins of what was destroyed. I'll never forget what Nina and Patricia did, but I'll also never regret what I did in response. Some bridges need to burn. Some people need to face consequences. Some betrayals can never be forgiven, only survived, and that, I realize, is the only victory that matters. They say living well is the best revenge. I disagree. Living honestly is. Everything else is just noise.